Welcome back. We've just finished creating this weapon slot widget blueprint. Now we're going to create an actual inventory bar of slots that we'll place at the bottom right of the screen. So in the HUD folder, we're going to create a new widget blueprint. So right click, user interface, and widget blueprint. We're going to call this inventory bar. Now double click to open inventory bar, and we're going to delete the canvas panel. Now let's add an overlay so we can have things on top of each other. So overlay, drag that right in, and we're going to set this from fill screen to custom and drag this out to a nice rectangle like this. Now let's add a vertical box so we can have a top and a bottom section. So let's go ahead and get a vertical box, drag it in there. I'm going to set this to fill horizontally and vertically, and I'm going to call this overlay box. Overlay box. Now I'm going to add two horizontal boxes so that way we can line things up horizontally. So let's type in horizontal and get horizontal box. I'm going to drag that in, and I'm going to drag in another one as well so that way we can have two rows of boxes. Let's call the first one top box, and let's call the bottom one bottom box. And for the top box, I'm going to set this to fill and use a value of 0.6. And the bottom one, I'll set this to fill and use 0.4. So 60% is taken up by the top box. Now for the top box, I'm going to add three horizontal boxes. So let's drag in 3, 1, 2, 3. Make sure they're all dragged on to the top box so they're all children of the top box. Now for the first one, I'm going to call this ammo count top box. For the second one, I'm going to call this default weapon top box. And for the third, I'm going to call this inventory top box. Now I'm going to set ammo count top box to fill, and I'm going to use a value of 0.275. For default weapon top box, I'll set it to fill and use 0.125. And for inventory top box, I'm going to use 0.6. Now, let me explain what I'm doing here. The right side of this inventory top box, I'm going to split that into a bunch of small boxes, maybe 5 or 6, and those will be for the inventory icons, the inventory widgets. And then for the middle part, I'm going to have this show the default weapon. This will be its own inventory slot that will have a default weapon spawned at the beginning of the game. That's our default equipped weapon. And then of course this is going to be an ammo count box. It's going to show us how much ammo our currently equipped weapon has. Now we're going to add these same boxes to the bottom box, only we're going to give these the same names with bottom instead of top. So let's drag horizontal boxes onto the bottom box, a total of 3. And let's call the first one ammo count bottom box. And let's call the second one default weapon bottom box. And let's call the third one inventory bottom box. And we'll give these the same values. We'll set the first one to fill and 0.275 for that. We'll set the second one to fill and use 0.125. And for the third one, we'll give this fill a value of 0.6. So now we have this inventory box partitioned into 6 smaller boxes. Now I'm going to have a little sliver here, and this is going to be like a little separator, a little bit of padding to separate, and I would like it to have its own box so we can stick something in there. I'm going to go ahead and drag 2 boxes into the default weapon top box. So let's go ahead and drag 2 boxes in here. And for this first one, I'm going to call this default weapon TL for top left. And the second one, I'll call this default weapon TR for top right. Now default weapon top left, I'm going to fill with 0.9. And default weapon top right, I'm going to fill with 0.1. So now we have this little bit of a sliver here. Let's do the same for default weapon bottom box. I'm going to drag 2 boxes in. I'm going to call the first one default weapon bottom left, BL, and this next one will be called default weapon BR for bottom right. It looks like I made a small typo here. Okay, so default weapon bottom left will be fill with 0.9, and default weapon bottom right will be fill with 0.1. And now we have this little sliver on both the default weapon top and bottom. Now, finally, we're going to add boxes to the inventory side here. This is going to have several boxes for each inventory slot icon. So let's add 5 boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are all going into the inventory top box. We're going to set them all to fill, and they can all have a value of 1, so that way they all take up each the same amount of space. So once setting them all to fill, they now all look like squares. And if they're slightly stretched, you can go ahead and drag the entire widget with this little icon here so that they look relatively square. Now let's name these. The first one I'm going to call Weapon 1 Top Box. So Weapon 1 Top Box. I'm going to do the same for all of these, except I'll name them 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the second one will be called Weapon 2 Top Box. The third will be Weapon 3 Top Box. The fourth will be Weapon 4 Top Box. And the fifth will be Weapon 5 Top Box. Now we're going to do the same thing for the bottom box. So let's drag 5 boxes into inventory bottom box. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll select each one and set them to fill, and I'll leave their fill value at a value of 1, so they all take up the same amount of space. And I'm going to call this one Weapon 1 Bottom Box. I'm going to copy that text so I can paste it in here. The second one will be Weapon 2 Bottom Box. The third will be Weapon 3 Bottom Box. The fourth is Weapon 4 Bottom Box. And the fifth is Weapon 5 Bottom Box. Okay, so now we have this nice grid system for our inventory. Now remember, we created an ammo count widget. If we go back and hit play, we'll see that we've got this little widget here that shows the amount of ammo in the weapon versus the amount of ammo we're carrying. It's got the ammo type and it's got the weapon name. This is the ammo count BP widget. We're going to go ahead and add this to our inventory bar. So let's go back into inventory bar and let's select our ammo count top box. That's this one right here. Here is where we're going to add our ammo count BP. So let's search in the palette for ammo count BP and drag that right on there. Now it looks like it's a little big, so we're going to go ahead and scale the whole thing up a little bit, like that. So go ahead and scale things up a bit and stretch out the inventory enough to accommodate for this. Now for each of the weapon top boxes, we're going to add a weapon slot widget. Remember, weapon slot is this widget we just created. So let's go ahead and search the palette for weapon slot and drag that in to each of these, starting with the default weapon top left. Now select fill, and we can leave horizontal and vertical alignment at fill. Go ahead and drag a weapon slot into each of the weapon top boxes, selecting fill for each of these. And now we have a bunch of weapon slots. Now let's name these. Let's scroll up to where we added a weapon slot to the default weapon top left. And let's call this one default weapon slot. So let's go ahead and rename this. We'll call it default weapon slot. And for inventory 1 top box, let's name this weapon slot 1 without the underscore. And we'll call this weapon slot 1, we'll call this one weapon slot 2. We'll go to the next one and call this weapon slot 3. The next one will be weapon slot 4, and the last one will be weapon slot 5. So the one here to the left of this little spacer, this is called default weapon slot, and then these are weapon slots 1 through 5. Okay, so I think this is a good stopping point. We now have a inventory bar, and we're using our weapon slot in each of these weapon slot boxes, and we're using our ammo count BP right here in the top left, and that allows us to show that information that we have in that widget blueprint. Let's go ahead and compile and save this. And in the next video, we're going to continue with our inventory bar. I'll see you soon.